You cannot make $1 billion business in marketing in Switzerland.
Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Sylvan.
Christian, a very well welcome to the Swisspreneur Show. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thanks for having me.
You are the co-founder and board member at Kingfluencers, the leading Swiss social influence agency. And before we're going to talk about that venture, we actually want to start with your personal background. After getting your bachelor's in computer science from the ETH, you soon embarked on the entrepreneurial journey, basically. You started your first venture, which was called Hitz Dev, an independent developer studio. And I was just wondering what actually motivated you to get started in the agency business?
This was actually when we founded the company, was during our studies, actually. And the full, very nice name was Mobile Development Hitz and Partner. A funny story. So we actually kind of moved into that by accident because we did a project for Turbo and SBB with Jorim Jakis, Adam Cinek, and Samuel Hitz. And we kind of started this project, and we set up the account with Turbo. And kind of it turned out that it was too big a sum for them to just like transfer it to individual people. So we tried to figure out how to do that properly, and we actually got some consulting advice from ETH. I don't remember exactly, but some entrepreneur or help bureau we could use, and they suggested to found a Kollektivgesellschaft, which was very funny. And you got to have a name in that company of one of the founders, and that ended up being Samuel Hitz. So that's why this nice, very long name. No GmbH. I don't remember why we just didn't found one of those. But so this was actually during the studies, and why we did it is just because we had fun working and building a company basically by accident. Yeah.
And then suddenly you also actually came into sort of a transition because you then switched from the agency business to a more product-based business. Can you talk a bit more about the transition and how it happened?
Yeah, sure. So during the studies, we actually did this big project for Turbo. And after our studies, or at least the bachelor's, we did like group of friends, and particularly Jorim and Selim, kind of what we want to do. And we did internships, and then it was winter. And we found, okay, the master starts in autumn. Usually you should start in autumn. You could start earlier, but it wasn't really good because they base on each other. So we figured, okay, what do we do with our time? So we decided to build a product. Because we already worked together as a team at ETH and did some hackathons, went to the Panamove, so one of the first ETH teams, not the first, I think, nice. That went there. And we did very good placing. And we figured, okay, why should we not build a project? We can do something relatively quickly to generate some money. And it's just a fun project to spent the time until summer. It turned out to be a little bit differently, so it took a little bit longer. But when we launched, we were very successful. We got over 100,000 downloads for Timely in a matter of 30 hours. And then it turned out that the company got bought by Google, so that was also a little bit differently than planned, actually. It wasn't really the plan. And so that's kind of how we moved into that business. And from the beginning, we didn't really want to do some agency stuff or that work, but really build a nice product because we knew we can do it well. That's why we did it.
Makes sense. You seem to be very team focused. So you had a really killer team, so to speak, that was very talented. And you said, hey, we just want to work together first in the agency business. Then you said, okay, let's also build our own product. What made you such a good team?
That's a good question. I don't know. Usually we'd say like we complemented each other, but I mean, we were 4 software engineers, or like computer scientists, so that can't be it. No, I think we just worked well together, and we wanted to build something. We were ambitious, we were detail focused, and that at least worked for the kind of stuff we did there. I think like having 4 computer scientists is not always the best combination for any kind of product or startup, I guess. But I think we turned it around. We're like, okay, what can we do well together?
Right.
So it was clear from the beginning, for Timely in particular, that we will build an Android app that with like a product that already exists, so not something new or like you need to do it, but something we can do. But we will do much better than everyone else. And it was no accident when we choose the alarm clocks, because there were like 50 in the store, like not really good ones. So we thought like, okay, we can do that better in like 2 or 3 months. It took 4 months, but yeah.
I mean, that's still a pretty good timeline.
Yeah.
What was it particular that you did differently than the existing apps out there?
It was done by version 1 that actually got us some headlines just because of that, because most of the apps there were focused on iOS. We focused on Android, and it was finished with version 1 basically and done. It's not like very crappy done or like not working, but really solid version 1. We added features obviously, but they were minor compared to the rest.
Sure.
Not much of the things were missing otherwise.
Right. And then you mentioned you got more than 100,000 downloads in basically no time. At the certain point in time, you decided like, we want to build a great product because we are talented software engineers. When did you also start thinking about a potential business model or about monetization of the actual app?
From the beginning. So that was part of it. We actually had a lot of fun discussions like how to price it. Like, people weren't used to pay a lot for apps, in particular also not Android apps. We looked at the stores, $1 or like $1, euro about that. 2, 3, like let's go for 4 for the premium version. Right. We then overdid it kind of with an in-app store. So you could actually just buy out the ads. So ad-free version for maybe, I don't know, maybe €1 or something. And then we would try to upsell you to the custom themes and the sounds or the full premium version.
Nice.
And we were like, first, like, who's going to pay like $4 for, like, it was a one-time purchase. It was not not monthly. Nobody did that at that time. Nobody's going to like, who's going to pay that? So we were really nervous about the price. I was like, okay, let's try like, okay, simple. That's why we overdid it, because we weren't sure that anybody is going to pay $4. It turned out when we looked at the numbers, that if someone paid, most of the ones that did pay something actually just bought the premium for about $4 and not the lower tiers. So
fantastic.
That was learning based on the data we then gathered.
I think that's a very good learning, actually. Yeah. How many people were you able to convert from the free version to the actual paid version?
Oh,
just approximately. I think
the common numbers like in the lower 1%, lower one digits. I think, which was okay. Sure. We didn't do much, I think, to push it up. I think we, instead of showing ads, we actually showed ads for our premium version. I'm still not really sure if that was a good idea for the long term, to increase it and not just show ads and get paid. I don't know. That was one thing I was interested in trying, but like time frame wasn't there.
Exactly.
Show, so.
Yeah, luckily you didn't have to think too long term, because 11 months after founding the company behind Timely called Bitspin, you were actually acquired by Google, which is crazy. First of all, as a Swiss company, and second of all, in such a short time frame, basically. So how did the deal happen? Can you talk a bit more about the details there?
No, I can't unfortunately talk about the details as usual, but I know you need to ask the question. So it was also not very like spectacular in some sense. It was a lot of work to do stuff and do that. And it wasn't the plan A. So our app worked really well. So our plan A really worked for us. So we could build more stuff kind of independently and having that revenue. So that actually worked really well either way. So we really had the options. And it was, I think, in the end, difficult decisions to make. to join, not to join. There were a lot of pros and cons. And for me, in the end, I decided not to join Google because I kind of wanted to stay on the entrepreneurial track and build something up. That was kind of my motivation. But it wasn't, I mean, it was a really hard decision because Google has so many great people to learn from. I always like that too. Also staying with the team, building with the team. That was in Driver. We have worked together for a very long time. So I look back and it's kind of sad and not sad to have done the decision. I think for me personally it was, I think, the right one. But the other, would also be definitely a nice, good thing to do. But
and first, you also had to decide whether you actually want to sell. After you had the offer on the table from Google, how do you make that decision? Because you could also say, hey, we're such a great team. This is just the beginning. We can actually build much bigger things together. So how do you make that decision? Was the deal size just too lucrative to say no to, or what happened there?
Yeah, I think that's a part, like one of the things that I really thought about it. We really discussed as well. It's like, okay, when we can do it and we have this opportunity already, like what can we do if we work together longer? I mean, maybe it would have been better, maybe not. Maybe, for engineers is not the best combination to start something else. But I think in the end, it depends what you do and need to make the decision on that regard. And I think it was in the end an individual decision for every one of us. And I think it was turned out well for everyone, like how they did it, and not regretting the decision. So that's, I think, in retrospect, I think then probably a good decision. You don't always have like the right or wrong, but obviously, if you really regret it, you think, oh, we really should have done that. But you never know what could have been. That was a big part of the question there for me as well. I was like, okay, what could be staying together? And
absolutely,
you don't know.
And what was the rationale of Google of acquiring you? Did they just see that, hey, your technology, your app was just so much better than anything that they built themselves, so they wanted to buy and integrate that? Or was there any other thinking behind the strategy?
In the end, we don't really know, or I don't really know.
Okay.
I mean, it's speculation why or what, but they have the reasons, I guess.
And is it also true that you just get one offer and a very short time frame to say yes or no to that offer?
I don't even remember that in detail. And even if I think I couldn't really talk about it, but it's a process. It's certainly tough, and in particular because you need to make the decision. That's the hard part, I think.
Right.
Obviously, you have negotiations and stuff like that, but I think that part is common. Yeah.
And then it was basically a payday for you and your co-founders. What did you do with the money?
I kind of started working on other stuff, kind of not really something specific. I think I bought did I buy a computer? No, I already had that. I didn't even invest in too much hardware. Yeah. No, actually, I think probably the biggest was that I moved out. We were living together. That was actually really fun and very intense time.
I can
moved
imagine.
together, started working together 24/7 basically, which is fun. Coming home Sunday evening, someone is still working or again working. I don't know.
Right.
And you go back to the computer as well. So since they then joined Google, I didn't we had to move out because of confidentiality stuff. So I guess an apartment, living alone, that was probably the biggest thing. But nothing specific. In the end, for me, it was clear it's going to be time invest in myself. That's kind of it for the journey. So it always have that option.
Right. It sounds that your life didn't change that much even after the acquisition. Did it make you feel any different? Did you feel more secure or financially free or anything of that sort that had an impact on you?
I guess, certainly there was some security, but we came, if you think about it, it came out of ETH and we started that kind of in parallel. So when we made money with our app, that already was the income that kind of gave us some security that we didn't really need much more per se, if you look at that. But you can also look at on the other side is actually the team. At that point, I didn't really have a team anymore. So, okay, what do you do? Do you do it alone? Do you look for co-founders or whatnot? that probably was also part of the thinking that went into my time there. Yeah,
makes sense. And then you continued the entrepreneurial path. You then founded Panamove, a personal training startup. And this venture lasted for less than a year. So what went wrong there? What did you take away from that experience?
I mean, first of all, I think this is interesting for the entrepreneurs. I mean, this wasn't the next thing. Actually, I did a lot of projects and tried out a lot of things in between. I worked with different people, tried out other projects that we killed even earlier than we ended up in Panamove, like closing Panamove. So it's also a process. I mean, this is also one of the things after the sale to Google. It's like, okay, starting from square one, what do you do?
Right.
And then it's a lot of trying, I think, as well, and like finding someone to work with. And then I co-founded Panamove with Gregor Loresh. I got to know during that time before a little bit. And we decided to found, or like this was one of the things that were like, okay, they could work longer. Like a lot of pieces came together. Mm-hmm. So we decided to try that out. And there was, I think, also a lot of learnings involved. I did the post. I actually did a longer postmortem. I never posted online. I have much more learnings for that. A lot of things worked well. We did revenue after like 2 or 3 months, the first customers, so it was nice too. We iterated a lot there too with the model pricing. Mm-hmm. But in the end, we found like a lot of things worked, but a couple critical things we never really figured out how it should be solved and how it can actually be sustained. We even would have had investors, like the first angels that would have invested, most likely. You never know until you close, but True. Most likely. Yeah. But we then basically went back, like, okay, now we stop because we didn't figure out those crucial parts, and if we don't even see in an optimistic way how that could work, like what's the point in going forward? Right. It was a really hard decision because so many things worked and we really had a need in the market. But if you don't see your being able to make the model work, it's really the question how you should you pivot. And we saw some things we could do, but then we end up like deciding, okay, we don't even want to go into that direction. So the motivation didn't really wasn't really for that kind of business that would have been able to turn out. That we saw that that's probably going to work, but we don't want to do that. It's not sustaining the vision we had initially. So
Got it.
Kind of the decision.
What were some of the crucial things that you weren't able to figure out? Because it's probably very deeply rooted in the product or the business model. So do you have 1 or 2 examples about these points?
In the end, it was kind of a complex, more difficult platform model, right? Where we had fitness studios, customers, obviously, and personal trainers. And we tried to make a model work that connects the 3 of them, connected through a platform. And kind of what we figured out we weren't able to do as a platform is kind of controlling the quality really on a sustainable basis, that in particular the customers are happy with the service. So we figured, okay, you need a little bit more control over the individual elements that you can make it work well enough to sustain the quality.
Got it. And I also would like to talk about 2 particular things. First of all, how to test and identify ideas and then decide what to focus on. And then also when to decide to move on and move away from an idea, basically. Let's start with the first part. You mentioned there was a period between the exit to Google and the foundation of Panamove. How did you test and also evaluate ideas and then decide what you actually want to focus on? Because that's something that I can imagine many potential entrepreneurs out there have real struggles with.
Yeah. It's also, I think, a difficult thing. That's probably there's not the one fits all. In the end, I think it's execution in a way, just do something. Test it, talk to customers, try it, and if you're not getting paid, you're probably doing something wrong. So that's a helpful way. And then I think it's a lot of reflection, like, okay, what does work, what doesn't work, why doesn't it work? And I think the hardest thing then is like deciding, okay, when to stop, because you always hear like, okay, never stop and like always go forward. That cannot be. Like most of the entrepreneurs and also successful companies, they started with something else and they stopped at some point doing something as well. So it just cannot be true that you always have to do it. So sometimes you also have to reflect. I think it's the motivation you need to look like, okay, why do you go forward, or what doesn't work and why? And if it's a fundamental thing, like for Panamove, if the core business model or the value proposition just doesn't work, and that would mean you need to pivot into a business model and basically a different kind of business that you really don't want to do on a personal level. That's okay, then why should you do it? It's like just for the sake of it, maybe. If you have investors, maybe you need to do it, maybe not. You can talk to them. I think then like it gets more complex if you have more stakeholders. For us, for Panamove, it was relatively easy because it was bootstrapped until that point, just 2 people like working or investing money into it. So you can make the decision relatively easy, and arguing with motivation, I don't want to do it, is a fair point to give something up if it's just you. If you have investors, maybe not. Maybe you should try more until you really cannot do something else. Maybe you can stop. And I think this is a very different mindset in the Valley than it is here. I think in the Valley, I read a lot of stories, or you read a lot of stories sometimes, like, okay, an entrepreneur tries this, and then you have actual investors spending maybe already invested millions, and the entrepreneur, okay, it doesn't work. They maybe proactively tell you, okay, why should you try 3 years now to make it work? If it doesn't really work, you'd rather stop it and start something new, and then maybe this is a win. And this also makes, I think, from a VC perspective more sense, betting on something that can get big than trying to save something that might work, maybe not. And I think this is different here in Switzerland. You're probably a little bit more, where you try to make it work a little bit longer than just to give up and start something new. Because risk aversion and failure culture, I think that's the whole part of it as well.
So here we tend to ride the dead horse a bit longer than in other ecosystems.
Yeah, I guess you can phrase it that way, yeah.
In that regard, I mean, this of course heavily depends on the industry and the business model that you're facing, but is there a certain time frame where you say, okay, this is about, in your case, it was like 3 to 4 months until you had the traction, some first revenue coming in. Is that a good time frame to give yourself to say, okay, I really want to make it work in that time frame? If you go into, I say, a consumer product, software business, like not biotech or anything of that sort, but something that you can also test in a more rapid, what's a good time frame to give yourself before you then have to decide whether do you continue or you stop?
Again, I think not something you can have a fixed time on it. I think it depends on, as you said, the industry, the model in general, but also the stage, I think, of the idea. I mean, if you have just an idea, a perfectly valid time frame is a couple of days, like sleep over it. Is it still a good idea? Yes or no? Do you think it is? And then maybe if a concept, you talk to people, then I think the time frame gets longer and longer. And you should obviously try to keep it as small as possible. Like Lean Startup, we by now I hope the watchers already have heard it a couple of times. Like try to keep it as short as possible, because if you spend it on something to try to figure out something for a year that you could have figured out in a month or a week, like you maybe have wasted much less time. And you could have tried something else in that time frame as well. But again, I think there's no right or wrong, but I would suggest like doing it continuously, reflecting, okay, what are you doing? Is it still the right thing? Because you always have to do it like what's working, what's not working, why does something not work, and what do you need to change?
Got it. And I'm also just curious, how do you actually reflect yourself? Do you write a personal journal? Do you talk to other people, or do you just go outside, sit on a bench and think things over? How do you reflect on a personal level?
All of the both.
Okay.
Everything. I think get as much feedback and reflection as possible, I guess, particular feedback. Because it's hard enough and it's ambiguous enough, the feedback anyway from people to something. I guess the most important feedback is obviously from your customers or users. Kind of not necessarily or in a very direct way. Obviously, you can interview them, but also in their behavior, like do they buy, do they upgrade, do they come again. This is the crucial feedback they have very directly. Then you obviously need to figure out why this is. And then you can go forward like higher and higher level, like strategically, is it the right thing? Is it the right model? Yes or no? And yeah, I mean, this is very personal, but I reflect personally a lot about the things instead of just running into a wall and trying. So like, okay, taking a step back, which is hard, always very hard. If things are burning, it's hard to step back, but it's important because otherwise you're just putting out fires that cannot be it either.
Yeah. Switching from that reactive to a more proactive mode of operation is crucial also to not burn out yourself, because then you can put out fires all day long and it will eventually also burn you out, right?
Yes.
So last question on the Panamove story. Basically, when he then decided to stop the operations and to close the shop, what did that do to you on a personal and emotional level? Like, was that difficult for you to execute that step? Did he also feel like any negative energy or like pulled down and needed some time to reflect and recharge, or how did he handle that on a personal level?
I think the time leading up to the decision, or like pulling the trigger on the decision, I mean, it was a tough time, a couple of weeks, I guess. And even before, I mean, you saw that things don't work, or like crucial things, and you try certain things, and it's very demanding, it's very tough. And in particular, then going to the decision points, like, okay, what does it mean? Like, what do you have to do? And like, how will people perceive yourself? What do customers say? You need to inform them. It's not a very pleasant thing to do. So you go there. But I think at that point, when you make the decision and actually execute it, there's some kind of relief, because you made a decision and you're trying to look forward instead of like backwards. And I think that is, if I try to remember back, I think there was kind of the feeling also after it, like, okay, made the decision, now let's look forward. And that is, I think relieving as well. Instead of trying, should I not? At some point, just making a decision is better than not making any progress or decision.
Sounds like a good message to take away and to reflect personally yourself about that. And then you didn't stop there. You then moved on with the next entrepreneurial venture, basically. In 2016, you founded Kingfluencers together with 3 co-founders in total. So how did that idea come about? Was Kingfluencers born, basically?
Again, it wasn't right after, so it was a time in between. I did some holiday, I guess, probably, but also time like reflecting, trying new things, looking what do I want to do. And it's also a good thing after you finish something, positive or negative, to think about what you do.
Right.
And at that point, I also kind of thought like, okay, what do I do? And I really wanted to start something again, build something up, kind of going through the pain again that I went with Panamove or the other company. I think it's a perfectly valid decision, also making decision, okay, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to do something else. It's always just important, I think, to give it some time, not just right after, but really taking a little bit of time. So then I got to know Roman and Fabian, my other co-founders, and the story is a little bit longer. Kingfluencers already existed, at least part of it. But then when I met Roman and Fabian, actually through my co-founder from Panamove, Greg, it was really fun. He made the introduction to Kingfluencers, and those two, we were like, okay, influencer marketing, it's a very interesting field. I actually, in the beginning of 2016, when I looked for projects, I looked into influencer marketing as well myself personally, but I didn't have like the components. I didn't have connections to brands or marketing industry in general. So I put the idea a little bit aside, but then when I met them, I was like, okay, this is perfect. We are now like a very diverse team, at least in the sense of our backgrounds. So Fabian came from marketing and sales more, Roman from the operational side, finance side, and I from the tech side. Like, okay, this works. This can work perfectly together, at least on paper. Right. The biggest thing was we didn't know each other. We didn't know how to can we even work together? But after some meetings, we were like, okay, the only way to figure out is just to try it. What else you can do? You can talk about it as much as you want, but you need to make a decision. Let's try it. If it doesn't work, we'll know it probably in a couple of months. Otherwise, we'll never know. The kind of started that journey. Yeah,
amazing.
2016. Yeah.
So there were no co-founder retreats at the beginning or tough tests. You just started working together to find out if you actually function well.
Yeah.
I think that's also good because many people are also, stressed out about the fact I want to do something, but I don't have the right co-founders on my side. And just starting together, probably also taking into considerations, what do we do if things don't work out to not jeopardize the company? That's probably the best setup that you can do, to just start working together, and you will probably feel it immediately after a few weeks if it works out or not.
Yeah, I think that's always the beauty. I mean, I don't necessarily like the slogan Nike, just do it, but it has so much truth in it. If you don't know, just try it. What else do you have to lose? I mean, you need to figure out. Sometimes you have something to lose, obviously, yes, but there's always a way to try something. Even if you work somewhere, if you want to try an idea, just do it. Maybe you can reduce to 80% work, 20% on it, or do it on the weekend. If you don't even want to do that, then it's probably not the right thing either way.
Yeah.
So
it's that's also a sign you're probably not passionate enough to actually build a business around that specific thing.
Before we continue with the show, we would like to introduce you to our new partner, Nuco. Nuco helps founders navigate the paperwork that starting a company involves. From the first consultation all the way to the commercial register, Nuco has helped more than 900 entrepreneurs start their company, and they do so at highly competitive prices. To find out more, visit nuco.ch/Swisspreneur. Again, that's nuco.ch/Swisspreneur. And now, on with the show.
If we talk about the idea, what we often also hear from podcast guests is that they want to focus on the problem that they want to use themselves, or solve themselves, the product that they want to use themselves. In that regard, how was the idea process or the idea behind Kingfluencers different from Panamove? Because Kingfluencers is still 5 years after founding, still active, growing very nicely. So what was the difference in terms of the ideation process behind it?
I think the fact that kind of three people came together with kind of their individual experiences of it kind of made it different than to come up with an idea for a problem per se. I try to remember, I think for influencer marketing, I actually had a project beginning of 16 that I was thinking, okay, now I have this, it works. I kind of would need an influencer now, okay, how to go about that. And it was just nothing there, how you would find them or pay, in terms of the flow. So it was just nothing there. So I experienced it in at least a little part myself as a startup, but I obviously didn't know it from the perspective of a big brand. At that point, it was also kind of different time. I mean, people didn't really look that strongly. We needed to be also the educator of the market and influencer marketing and making it more professional and all that kind of stuff, which was important for a new marketing channel. So the idea was clear. I mean, it's influencer marketing, you have customers. So I think the model was quite clear from the get-go, how that should work, at least in a rough sense. So it's not a completely different model. You have marketing, you have money, it goes to a channel. In that regard, it was influencers, and they make posts, and you get something in return, which is traffic or impressions or views or something like that. So from that regard, it was already a set model. But I think the difficulty was to really embed it. Okay, how do you do it? How does an offer look like? How does a report look like? How do you do the whole management process? And what is needed? And from the beginning, it was kind of intuitive, clear what we need to do. Okay, customers, they need to be treated. They had their request. Obviously, they pulled out their needs. If they wanted to have a report, we need to deliver a report. And then you go figure it out, at least in some part, at least the things you don't have yet. So it was kind of a more a model that kind of already went into execution mode, and you iterated a lot more on that regard instead of a very smart business model and stakeholder design. I mean, you had to do how does the pricing work and stuff like that, and that also changed over time.
And you brought all these sites together on your platform basically and built it up from there. That's your core offering basically at heart.
Yes, I mean, in the beginning, it was very important to being able to execute as many campaigns as possible and try to automate the stuff we did kind of partially manually or manually even with Excel sheets and bringing it together on the most crucial things. And the difficulty is like you can think about all the things you can do or should do, but then the question is, okay, what do you do? How do you build a business, and how can you build something that adds a little bit more value, that you can do more revenue or cater more customers or cater the quality needs and stuff, and make the hard decisions what to focus on. And this was, I think, a very still is hard to do, because there are many more things you can do than you should do.
And how does your business model look like these days?
From the outside, it's still kind of the same. Like you have a customer that has a budget, or we try to focus on, okay, they have set budget, and we try a little bit more to figure out, okay, what do they want to achieve with it, than just to go with like, okay, you get so many impressions or you get this, but what you want to achieve, and then model the campaign or also the services we offer nowadays around it in a better sense. Because if we figure, okay, they say they want to have this, but they don't have the foundational, like on the strategy part maybe, or their social media is not like on the same level, it doesn't make sense maybe to push that much into one thing and then like lose the steam, but maybe you should distribute it better. And that's also kind of what goes into our offering. So we are not only influencer marketing, but also social media agency more and more, to be able to integrate it better, to that customers get more out of it.
Nice. And you mentioned that 2016 was actually still pretty early on in the influencer marketing game. So why was it still the right timing to actually start Kingfluencers as a company? Was it more driven by the finding of your co-founders, your team, like a more an internal thing? Or was there also a shift or anything external in the market that pushed you that way?
I think it was a little bit more advanced in other countries than Switzerland. So maybe UK, the US, it was a little bit more established. But in Switzerland, it wasn't. So that in it was always kind of a factor. So we can always do it better here and do it more locally and cater to services. So there was always the question like, okay, some competitors coming to Switzerland actually like pushing us out or something like that, competing with them, maybe with more funding and whatnot. There was always a concern. It's always is a concern. But in the end, if you offer additional services like we do as well now, part of strategic decision, you can offer things they cannot do it from the UK here in Switzerland, because you have the connection to the clients, the brands, but also maybe you have a better market know-how. So that's was always an option to have. And from that regard, it was, okay, let's try it again here. I mean, maybe someone comes around and pushes you, but should you not start or do something because of that, because of fear? I guess not. Figure out and have to be better than others as well. It also pushes you.
And in that regard, also the other markets sort of served as inspiration, because often you see trends emerging in the US and then coming to Switzerland 3, 4, 5 years later, right?
Yeah, there was certainly a point. And for us, it was good because it changed the mindset on the side of our customers as well. Nice. They didn't look at it at something, that's very stupid, like, these influencers. But they were like, okay, our brand maybe even in the US like spends millions already on it, like maybe they should also consider it. So the mindset changed over time. I think that was important in Switzerland, that sometimes it takes a little bit longer to get here, but if it gets here, it's a good business as well.
Great. And in that regard, if you look at the Swiss market, from the outside perspective, you might think, okay, well, Switzerland, it's a nice start, but it's probably also a pretty small market. Can you actually build a good business around that?
Yeah, you can. No, it's a good question, but I think for many things, it probably doesn't make a lot of sense to just focus on the Swiss market, because the Swiss marketing or advertising market is in itself relatively big. I mean, depends on what you're thinking about. I mean, you cannot make $1 billion business in marketing in Switzerland. That's probably not going to work. But you can make a good business. But this also depends how you grow, what model you go in, what direction you go, if it's a good business or not. Not all the businesses have to be $1 billion businesses. So,
sure, absolutely not.
Also other stuff. This, I mean, is again maybe looping back to the beginning or depends on the expectations of all the stakeholders. If you have investors and you have a team, it's just like, okay, we don't care about revenue or short-term profitability. We just want to make something really big, huge, international. Then you should maybe consider different paths instead of like, okay, we can also do it differently and we can take more time or not to build something else or pivot in a direction that would not be possible if you have a different mindset or you got money for a different reason. Like you need to build something big, then it doesn't make sense to make a smaller company out of it. And that depends on how you grow and what decisions you make on the go.
Yeah, that makes sense. I also wonder, advertising with influencers can also be a delicate challenge because it's also very much about staying authentic, but also credible. How do you deal with that challenge?
That's a big question. That's our secret.
The secret sauce, basically.
The very short answer is we tell influencers stay authentic and don't do stuff that you cannot get behind. It's kind of in a rough sense, and we obviously monitor that as well. We select influencers based on that. You select the influencers based on the match with the brand that cannot even happen or it should not even happen. You don't select someone or match someone to a brand that is completely off from the beginning, because then the chances are higher that they try to something different or they do whatever they do, then is the customer not happy, or they try to be more like they want it to be, the brand wants the influencer to be, and then the community is not happy, so you have to strike the balance there.
Because the followers, the people, they can smell that if it's not authentic, right? You just realize that very quickly. Easily.
It's harsh. And most influencers, I think, are interested to keep their community because they spend a lot of time building it up, and then just wasting it because of a little bit money, it's just not worth it if they spend 3 years building it up.
Absolutely. Is there also any technology that helps you to sort of match the right influencers with the right brands or to actually monitor the whole thing?
Our platform uses a lot of libraries. We build our own systems, machine learning, AI systems to match or forecast. A lot of things based on that. Nowadays you can't even, have a bakery without a computer system. So why should you be able in the digital world? It's big. There's a lot of complexity, obviously. It's just how it works. And I think that also gives a certain moat against competitor or new entrants because it's hard to build it all up from the beginning. And we reinvested into the business heavily over the time in those systems.
Right. If we focus on your platform again, it's a two-sided platform. You already basically made your experience with Panamove. What did you do differently here at Kingfluencers to actually make it work? Because that was one of the big challenges back in the days at Panamove.
It's in the details, really in the details of the model, how it works. If you connect a personal trainer with a customer, it's a completely different relationship than if you manage a marketing post with a brand and an influencer. So yes, there is a relationship, but it's less tight and less rigid. It's more accepted to change. So it's a completely different dynamic. And the difference is, I looked at the model with all the things that we did with Panamove, and I asked the question, is this true here as well? Does it work, or this part work here? Or doesn't it? Or where are the challenges? Where are the risks? Are they the same risks? Yes or no? And obviously there are different parts, but it helped me a lot to think about this new model, which is completely different, but it helps to look at certain things. Obviously, marketplace, it's always customer can go directly. It was in both scenarios the same thing. With Panamove, this was not really a problem. We actually had something that could solve that, so it wasn't a problem that the customer can't go. Obviously, they can, but it wasn't a really big risk in the end for us. And for Kingfluencers, it's kind of the same. Obviously, customers can do it themselves. Our best customers tried it themselves and figured out it's really hard and it costs so much money to do it yourself, and then it doesn't turn out well. So they came back to us, and that kind of was the experience there as well. So kind of comparing that, it was really interesting to see how it's the same but completely differently solved.
That's very interesting. Another interesting thing happened probably after a lot of reflection that you practice in 2020 when you decided to step down as CEO and focus your future role on a board member. How do you actually make that decision and also then manage the transition from CEO to a board member? I can imagine this is a very, very big decision to take. So how do you manage that?
Yeah, it was a big decision. I mean, it was, I think, clear from the beginning, at least for me or for when we started it. It's like, okay, that this position, I mean, it always changes anyway, but it was from the beginning clear for me. I didn't want to be the CEO. It just ended up being making sense. And obviously, I wanted the challenge and the experience. But that is not a good reason in itself. So it just helps. If you don't want to do it, then maybe you shouldn't even do it from the beginning. But it came together. It worked well in that setting. But it was clear to me at some point it doesn't make sense because you need a different skill set for different phases of your company. Mm-hmm. At the beginning, you start. I mean, we were 3 people. And in the beginning, it was like very unglamorous. I wrote code all day. Like managing 3 people, like parts, there wasn't really a lot of work. You need to think about a lot. You do some things. You start hiring, and you're getting obsolete all the time anyway. And then, I mean, for me, the transition started like, okay, I hire engineers, we hire different people. It gets more strategic. You think about all this stuff. You think about fundraising. So your role changes anyway all the time. So the thinking about thinking your role should be there from the beginning. And in that regard, it wasn't really like new to make, I'm not a CEO. I don't want to be a CEO. I want to build something up. I want to create value. I want to have happy customers and obviously also shareholders and investors. But in the end, the company is in the foreground and not any shareholder, not any investor, not even the customers or influencers, but the company in itself. That needs to survive, needs to grow. And then you need to ask, okay, who is the best person for that or that phase? It's also very strategic decision. And I think since you're as a founder, you're always usually also the person or people that are doing the big strategic decisions. Mm-hmm. You also need to think in those terms and not only as you as the operator, because fires, right? And you're in this treadmill, and getting out is hard. But it helps if you separate your roles and it's like, okay, what makes sense for the company and what is the right or the right fit. And so it was also a lot of talks and discussions, and I think at the beginning it was also not easy to find, like, okay, when, even if you know it, figuring out when is the time, the exact time to do it is not always that easy, I think, because you need to, you could predefine it in the beginning, like, okay, when this happens, maybe that would make it easier. But it's also fine to say, I want to be the CEO for a very long time, but the best thing is if you're very clear from the beginning what you want to do, then you can also always tell all your shareholders, this is how I want to do it. That's fine. And for me, I think it was the same. I was very clear. That's not it. If it doesn't make sense, then it should change. And that's also in the interest of the company and me as a shareholder as well, that the company has the organization that it needs. And concretely, it was mostly the transition from a build-up phase to really focus on commercialization, really pushing the company on sales, marketing, really make it more, let's say, more sustained and organization out of it. That during the transition, like, okay, I'm not the person to maybe lead, maybe a little bit through this transition, but then like really the commercial organization. I'm not a commercial guy. So that was for me not a natural thing to do, and I also didn't want to go too much into that direction.
Got it. So because I can imagine for many people, it can be incredibly difficult to let go, to step down, because it also feels like you lose something that's very valuable or strongly attached to you. For you, it sounds the opposite. You were very clear from the beginning, and at the same time, probably also it helps that the tasks that then come with the commercialization, with the rapid growth, that this is probably not something that you thoroughly enjoy yourself. You probably prefer building. Did that also help a big time to actually make that decision and let go?
Yeah, definitely. I think also something to think about is always, I mean, if you're a company, like probably in any position, you have oftentimes you have gut feeling decisions you need to make. You need to make a decision. Okay, which direction do you go? What to focus on? What priority to take? And if you, like, your background is tech, or this is mostly what you do, or you like also to do, your gut will go into that direction. Right. And for me, it's very clear, this is not the right direction for the strategies. We need to make the gut decisions from someone that is obviously cares, and there's a lot of like requirements that need to be set as well. But then the decisions are better, going more into the direction you want to have it to go. And that helps to really separate like your ego. I mean, you need to separate your ego from it. It's like, it's not personal, it's not about me. I think it's much easier to make the decision to do that, and also communicate it and figure it out. But I also have a lot of very good people around me making decisions in the board. Was a little helpful. We had the discussion, open discussion, and that's also helpful, having right people to talk to that also tell you, or like challenge your assumptions and stuff.
100%. And when you actually then communicated it, do you have any recommendations for people in a similar situation? Because many people, you potentially also hired them. They sort of saw you as a leader. They followed you. They bought in on your vision. How can you make sure that once you change your role and you leave as CEO, that they are still motivated, still believe in the vision of the company, and don't take that the wrong way? Is there anything that you can recommend?
I mean, first of all, your decision for it needs to be sound and reasonable, and you need to be able to follow that. And if you have done that, I think you can basically communicate it like that. And if someone like doesn't see it, or like it's not a fit anymore, then maybe you need to part. It's absolutely normal for that to happen. And I'm not sure if that actually was the reason, but we obviously changed the organization over time. People went, maybe part of that based on this decision, and this is absolutely fine. An organization, a company, is an organism that needs to evolve, and it cannot evolve if you're stuck or like try to be something that's not. And you need to find the people that actually follow the strategy, or are suiting to that strategy and the vision, if that changes.
Right.
So.
And I also wonder now, with the change of role, a bit like almost, not exactly, but almost a year ago, how has your life changed? How does your day look like? Do you have more time for other things now, or how does your day look like these days?
Yeah, it is quite different. It's funny. I'm still involved part-time, working on the tech and product part, as well as like more strategic operative stuff that sometimes gets mixed a little bit, obviously, and also in the board. So that is interesting, like changing role and having people that do things that you can advise or help, but will ultimately make the decision. And it's also very nice to see how that works, and how much you can do from a board to steer. And my personal week or day looks different. Yeah, I work on different projects, personal projects. Right now, we launched actually with a friend of mine a different app, kind of side project. It's called Eminem, and we cut M's out of podcasts.
I saw it. It looks super cool, and the name is just
the
amazing.
name is good, right? So at least that one we got right. So it was fun, like building up something from scratch again. We now have users, customers, revenues. So this is nice. Still needs work, obviously, but that's fun to do as one project. And I have two, 3 other things in other industries that I work on. When time permits. It's a little bit more hectic, and I need to shift around stuff, but that's also fun for a while, instead of like if you're focused like a couple of years just on one thing. And I was very, very focused. That was basically didn't work on anything else at that time. That is now very, very different, but also fun and energizing, and also nice because sometimes you can actually apply learning from one to the other. You have sometimes more distance as well. So it mutually benefits itself a little bit as well.
And in that regard, I can imagine that you also have to face a decision one day, whether you also want to go down the investor route, basically. So how do you decide whether you want to focus your time on investing in startups, in other companies, versus building them yourself?
It's a good question again, and I cannot really answer it right now. But I mean, I always have been a builder. I like to build up stuff. That was kind of in my gene, if you want to have. So I think that I like the process. I like the building up, the generating of something new. Investing obviously is something a role a lot of people then go in. Without the definitive answer, like don't get me hung on it, I probably will not do that full time. I mean, I did some minor stuff investing, but not full time, and not most likely not as a VC, maybe part time. I think it's very interesting to see a lot of companies,
Right.
And from a high level, that is really, I think, interesting to get into, or maybe even go into it a little bit more deeper, but not just on a monetary level somehow. So if it will be connected, or maybe something else. So I like also the data, looking at companies, dissecting models, comparing them, and maybe not necessarily advising, but helping companies to do that, because it's so fascinating, so much complexity in organizations and in companies, models, and I like that a lot. So that's maybe goes into that direction.
So we probably won't see you as full-time investor, but maybe as part-time investor in the future.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Could be, yeah.
So before we wrap up the episode, we also would like to learn more about your personal resources that you can recommend to our listeners. That could be anything from books to podcasts, newsletters, whatever comes to mind. What can you share that you use yourself on a regular basis?
On a regular basis, I mean, I used to use more sources in the past, but right now, I mean, okay, let's search just right now. I mean, so I'm subscribed to TechCrunch, even have their premium thing, because nowadays they don't publish anything except news for the free part. So I try to upgrade and look at it, and it's nice. It's a little bit more in depth, so that's sometimes good. I read a lot of other news, but I mean, obviously there are a lot of books, the usual suspects, obviously, I guess. But I would go and recommend, like, and that's what I try to do as well, read a lot of other stuff as well, like at least nonfiction. I'm not sure about fiction. I don't really read a lot of fiction apart from holidays. Nonfiction, because what I find interesting is sometimes you always see something, you learn something from a completely different field, be it in biology, be it in chemistry, be it in history. Obviously, yes, you can read about finance, and there's so many things to learn, and you can always cross-reference at some time something because you saw it somewhere else. And I think this can give you at some point a really good differentiator. If you see, like, you have a startup, you have a model, and you see something very unconventional, make a very good unconventional connection, you can bring an insight from completely different field into your field and actually build a much, much better product. And I really believe that can happen, I think, because it has happened. But for that, you need to have a broad base of knowledge or information. And that's why I like it as well, but also thinking outside of your bubble and just the things everybody does, so they can help you. And probably it had helped me as well, at least in intuitive regard. So maybe this gut decision, sometimes you feel something is wrong, maybe because you've seen it or you have read it in different other categories. So this would be probably my resource to recommend, like, don't fixate on something or very going too niche. And particularly if you're an entrepreneur and you have a company, maybe you can learn from other stuff from much broader, because particularly if you're a founder or a CEO, your job is not doing something very, very good. It's making sure you have the people, the right organization to build on top of that. And if you have the insight to hire a very unconventional person, this could make a difference at some point.
I like that a lot. And it also brings me to a follow-up question, because if we zoom out a bit, we talked about your different ventures that you built. Some worked very well, others didn't. What actually motivates you? Do you have like a bigger thing that motivates you, that keeps you going, that you know, that's why I get out of bed in the morning?
Not one thing, I guess. It's kind of learning. It's not a very broad term, but I always like to challenge myself and do something else and grow bigger as a person and being able to do more stuff. I always get bored if I do something repetitively. I always try to optimize it, and probably not a lot of listeners and know that as well. So I don't know. I think that's probably it. So looking for the challenge and trying something new and not doing always the same thing. That's also why I try to like have different projects now and really like it, because I'm completely different fields. And like being able to connect those dots from different industries or models or products or whatnot, that's I think the intellectual challenge, I like that. Challenge in itself as well, sometimes. Yeah.
Cool. And I think that's the self-reflective part that actually brought you here. So what you just mentioned, that's the right setup for you. But of course, that's not something that other people should just copy and say, oh, he sold his startup to Google. I also want to do that. So now I just copy your model. You have to self-reflect and think about what's right for me, what's my motivation, and then find
what you like, what you're good at. And I mean, other people, they're very good with something very specific in the niche, and you can do something out of that. And you maybe need to focus on that, but you cannot build something else, or probably you should not. But it's also, I always like to say, like, okay, try something else, and you can be more, or if you want to, but always like motivation, skills, and why or what you do it for. And it's so individual. There's no, I think, no right answers. And again, I want to say it here as well. I did a talk some time ago about advice and why not to take it. So don't take anything for granted I said today or here. Think for yourself and see what works for you or doesn't work for you. And I think the reflecting part helps.
Wonderful.
To think about that. Yeah.
So I think that's the perfect segue to the last part of this interview, to the rapid fire questions. So I either give you a short question or a selection, and you have to make either the selection or explain your answer in one sentence. Are you ready?
Yeah, I hope so.
Facebook, TikTok, or Instagram?
TikTok.
That's a clear choice for you. Why?
Actually, I thought a little bit about it because I thought we're going to have the question. TikTok, I have an account, I don't use it, but they're growing so fast. It's so different. It's so weird that I just like it. It's
nice.
It's
How many hours of sleep did you get last night?
I think a little bit over 7 hours, like full sleep.
Nice. Who's your favorite influencer? I know that's a mean one to ask.
That's very mean. I go with Zeki, let's say.
Yeah.
I think he's fun. Or
Absolutely.
also, like, we work a lot with him, and I think he changed also over time in his role. He thinks about what he does.
Cool. Agency or product business? That's an easy one, right?
No, actually, it's not. Product business, I would go for that now.
I thought so. Where do you go to think or to reflect, for that matter?
Anywhere.
Doesn't matter. It's constantly on your mind.
Yes.
Nice. And the last one, founder or investor?
Founder.
That's where you build things. Amazing. Christian, thank you so much for sharing your impressive story. It's been a real pleasure to talking to you, and we wish you all the best for whatever future projects you might tackle.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
This episode was brought to you by Swisspreneurs' main partner, Clara Business, the digital all-in-one solution for small businesses. Managing internal processes manually and on paper wastes an incredible amount of time. That's why Clara digitizes everything, allowing you to focus on what really matters, your core business. Go to clara.ch to find out how your business administration can be simpler, faster, and more efficient. Again, that's clara.ch.